I never thought I'd inherit anything. Growing up in a small town outside of Portland, my childhood was marked by what we didn't have rather than what we did. My mother, Helen, was always working double shifts at the diner to keep us afloat after my father left when I was 8. We rented the same cramped apartment for 15 years, the one with the leaky ceiling in the bathroom and the neighbor who played heavy metal at 3 a.m. So when Aunt Judith died and left me her Victorian house on Maple Street, I couldn't believe it. I barely knew her. She was my mother's estranged sister who lived like a recluse. Mom would occasionally mention her, usually with a mixture of pity and frustration. "Poor Judith," she'd say, brilliant but lost in her own world. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, handed me the keys with an envelope. "Your aunt was particular," he said, clearing his throat. "There's only one condition to your inheritance." He gestured to the envelope. "It's all in there." I opened it later that evening in my apartment. A single page with neat handwriting. "Lock the main door at 6 p.m. every day. No matter who knocks, no matter who calls out, do not open it until morning. The house is yours as long as you follow this one rule." I laughed at first. It seemed like the eccentric demand of an old woman who'd spent too much time alone. But the house was worth over $800,000 in today's market. For a 28-year-old mechanic with mounting debt, this was life-changing. I could live with one strange rule. The first week passed uneventfully. The house was beautiful, despite needing some repairs. High ceilings, ornate woodwork, large windows that filled the rooms with morning light. I dutifully locked the door at 6 p.m. each day, but no one ever came by. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older couples and young professionals. On the 8th night, at precisely 6:01 p.m., someone knocked. I froze in my new living room, coffee mug halfway to my lips. 3 firm knocks, deliberate and measured. I waited, thinking perhaps it was a delivery or a neighbor introducing themselves. Then a voice called out, "Daniel!" "It's me, your mother. Please open the door." My blood ran cold. It sounded exactly like my mother. The slight raspiness from years of smoking, the way she said my name with the emphasis on the first syllable. But my mother had moved to Arizona last year to live with her new husband. I'd spoken to her just yesterday on the phone, and she'd mentioned nothing about visiting. "Mom," I called back, approaching the door cautiously. "Yes, honey, please let me in. I need to talk to you about Judith's house." "There's something you should know." My hand hovered over the lock. It was my mother's voice without question, yet Aunt Judith's warning echoed in my mind. Why would Mom show up unannounced? Why hadn't she called first? "I can't right now, Mom, I'm sorry. Can you come back tomorrow morning?" Silence stretched for several seconds. "Daniel?" Her voice dropped lower, colder somehow. "Open this door right now. I raised you better than to leave your mother standing on the porch." A chill ran up my spine. "Something felt wrong, I'm sorry, but I can't tonight. I'll call you, and we can arrange." The door suddenly rattled violently, the knob turning back and forth. "Open this door." The voice was still my mother's, but twisted with a fury I'd never heard from her before. "This house is mine. She had no right." I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The rattling continued for nearly a minute before stopping abruptly. Silence fell again, heavy and oppressive, then a soft chuckle. "I'll come back tomorrow, Daniel. We're family after all." Footsteps receded from the porch. I didn't sleep that night. I called my mother's number in Arizona, but there was no answer. I'd left 3 voicemails, each more panicked than the last. At dawn, I finally dozed off on the couch, only to be awakened by my phone ringing. It was Mom. "Daniel, is everything okay? I saw your missed calls. Where are you right now?" I demanded. "At home in Scottsdale, of course. Rick and I just got back from our weekend in Sedona." "What's going on?" My mouth went dry. "Someone came to Aunt Judith's house last night. They sounded exactly like you. They wanted me to let them in." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mom, don't let them in," she whispered. "Whatever you do, don't open that door after 6. What's going on? Do you know something about this?" She sighed heavily. "I think it's time I told you about Judith and why we stopped speaking." Mom's story unfolded like something from a crime novel. Judith hadn't always been a recluse. 20 years ago, she'd been a brilliant corporate attorney at Hammond and Westfield, one of the largest firms in the state. She was ruthless in the courtroom, feared by opponents, and on track to make partner by 35. Then she took on Grayson Pharmaceuticals as a client. At first, it was just standard corporate law, Mom explained. But Judith started finding irregularities in their documentation, missing test results, inconsistent safety data. Grayson had developed a new painkiller that was being fast-tracked for FDA approval. When Judith discreetly raised concerns, the company's CEO, Robert Grayson, personally assured her everything was in order. But Judith was methodical, Mum continued. She kept digging and discovered they had deliberately hidden evidence that their drug caused liver failure in roughly 1 out of every 1,000 patients. The drug would generate billions in revenue. The projected deaths were considered an acceptable business risk. Instead of looking the other way, Judith gathered evidence. She was preparing to blow the whistle when someone broke into her apartment. They didn't take anything valuable, only her laptop and research files. The next day, she was called into a partner meeting at the firm. Anonymous accusations had been made about her mental stability, fabricated complaints from clients, concerns about erratic behavior. They offered her a choice, Mum said bitterly. Resign quietly with a modest severance, or be fired publicly with her reputation destroyed. Either way, if she spoke about Grayson, they'd make sure no one ever believed her. Judith took the severance and retreated to the house on Maple Street, which she'd inherited from our grandparents. She tried contacting journalists, but Grayson's influence ran deep. One reporter who showed interest died in an apparent hit and run. The others suddenly lost interest. The worst part, Mom said, her voice breaking, was that no one believed her. Even me. I thought the pressure had broken her. We fought about it, said terrible things. I didn't speak to her for years, until 3 years ago when the truth finally emerged. A whistleblower inside Grayson Pharmaceuticals leaked documents confirming everything Judith had alleged. The drug was pulled from the market, but not before it had caused hundreds of deaths. Judith was vindicated, but it was too late for her reputation. Too late for our relationship. Mom's voice was heavy with regret. She reached out to me once the story broke, but I was too ashamed to respond. But what does this have to do with locking the door at 6 p.m.? I asked, confused by the connection. After the scandal broke, Judith started receiving threats. Someone would come to her door in the evenings, claiming to be me or other people she knew, trying to get her to open up. She installed security cameras, but could never get a clear image of whoever it was. I felt sick. You think someone from Grayson is still after her, even though she's dead? Or they're after whatever evidence she might have left behind, Mom suggested. Daniel, I need you to look through her things carefully. Judith was smart. If she had proof of who was behind all this, she would have hidden it somewhere safe. I spent the next 3 days searching the house methodically. In Judith's study, behind a loose panel in the antique desk, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it and a small safe deposit box key. The letter inside explained everything. Judith had known she was dying months before her cancer diagnosis. Someone had been poisoning her slowly, subtle compounds that mimicked natural disease progression. She had collected samples, documented her symptoms, and secured evidence in the safe deposit box, along with a detailed account of Grayson's crimes. If you're reading this, her letter concluded, then my suspicions about certain members of the Hammond and Westfield firm were correct. They didn't just represent Grayson, they were investors from the beginning, with everything to lose if the company went down. I've left instructions with my lawyer. If anything happens to you, the evidence goes directly to the FBI and several international news organizations simultaneously. Armed with her documentation, I contacted Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist with a reputation for tackling corporate corruption. We met in public places, never at the house. I gave her copies of everything while keeping the originals secure. 3 weeks later, Chen published a devastating expose. 3 senior partners at Hammond and Westfield were arrested, along with Robert Grayson, who had been living comfortably in the Cayman Islands. The knocking at 6 p.m. stopped immediately. At the criminal trial, I sat in the front row as Robert Grayson and his accomplices were sentenced to decades in prison for fraud, criminal negligence, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder. As they led Grayson away, he looked directly at me with pure hatred. I held his gaze, thinking of Aunt Judith, who had sacrificed everything for the truth that evening. For the first time since inheriting the house, I didn't lock the door at 6 p.m. Instead, I invited my mother to visit. We sat on the porch together as the sun set, reconciling our own past, honoring Judith's courage, and finally bringing her story into the light. The media storm that followed the arrests was intense. For weeks, I couldn't step outside without reporters shouting questions. They camped at the end of my driveway until the police finally established a perimeter. My face was splashed across newspapers and news sites, always with the same headline variations: "Mechanic brings down pharmaceutical giant," or "Nephew finishes aunt's fight for justice." The district attorney, Elaine Winters, visited me personally to discuss the case. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and a reputation for being uncompromising. "We're adding additional charges," she informed me in my living room, declining my offer of coffee. "The evidence your aunt gathered goes beyond what we initially understood. This wasn't just corporate fraud." She laid out photographs on the coffee table. "These are the victims, 23 people who tried to come forward about the drug's side effects. All of them died in accidents or apparent suicides." I felt sick looking at the faces. Young, old, diverse backgrounds. Their only common factor was that they'd tried to speak out. Your aunt suspected this, but couldn't prove it. "The documents you found connect Grayson and the Hammond and Westfield partners directly to at least 8 of these deaths." The trial was expanded, delayed, and became even more high-profile. Death threats began arriving at the house. First by mail, then by email, finally by text from unknown numbers. The police installed a security system at my home and assigned an officer to check on me daily. Chen's article had been picked up internationally, and victims' families began filing massive lawsuits against Grayson Pharmaceuticals. Their stock plummeted. Their board members resigned en masse. The company that had once been worth billions was disintegrating. 2 months into the expanded investigation, I received a call from Detective Rivera, the lead investigator on the case. "We need you to come down to the station," he said, his voice tight. "There's been a development." At the station, Rivera led me into a small conference room where D.A. Winters was waiting, along with a man I didn't recognize. "This is Agent Donovan, FBI," Winters introduced him. "Mr. Saunders, we've uncovered something concerning." Agent Donovan placed a folder on the table. "We've been monitoring communications between Grayson and his associates. Yesterday we intercepted this." Inside the folder was a printout of an encrypted message. The contents were chilling: a $2 million contract for my elimination, with specific instructions that it should look like an accident or suicide. The message included detailed information about my daily routines, my workplace, even which grocery store I frequented. "We believe this was sent to a professional," Donovan said gravely. "Someone with military or intelligence background." I stared at the paper, trying to process that my life had been reduced to a transaction. "What am I supposed to do?" "Normally, we'd recommend witness protection," Rivera said. "New identity, new location, new life. But that's not possible in this case," Winters interjected. "You're too high profile now. Your disappearance would raise questions, and Grayson's people would never stop looking. So I'm just supposed to wait for someone to kill me." My voice rose with panic. Agent Donovan leaned forward. "No, we're going to set a trap. But we need your cooperation." Their plan was both simple and terrifying. I would maintain my routine while under constant surveillance. They would spread subtle misinformation about my schedule, creating an opportunity that would be too tempting for the assassin to pass up. When they made their move, the FBI would be waiting. "This is insane," I protested. "You're using me as bait." "We'll have agents with you at all times," Donovan assured me. some visible, most covert. You'll never be alone, and if something goes wrong, the three of them exchanged glances. We believe this is the safest approach, Winters said finally. The alternative is to wait for them to choose the time and place. I reluctantly agreed. For the next week, I lived in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound, scrutinizing every unfamiliar face. Agents were stationed in my home, following me to work, watching from nearby tables when I ate at restaurants. I felt like I was living in a fishbowl, but at least I was still living. On the 8th day, I arrived at Joe's auto shop where I worked. Everything seemed normal as I began my shift. Around noon, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the service bay. The customer was a woman in her early 40s, expensively dressed with a pleasant but forgettable face. Just routine maintenance, she said, handing me the keys with a warm smile. I'll wait, if that's all right. She sat in the waiting area, occasionally glancing at her phone, nothing suspicious about her behavior. I began working on her car, checking the usual: oil, filters, fluids, tire pressure. When I opened the glove compartment to check the service book, I found a small leather case instead. Inside was a syringe filled with clear liquid. My heart raced. I carefully closed the glove compartment and glanced toward the waiting area. The woman was watching me now, her smile gone, something cold and calculating in her eyes. When our gazes met, she stood smoothly and began walking toward me. Problem with the car? She asked, her voice light but her posture tense. Before I could answer, 2 mechanics from the far bay, FBI agents in disguise, tackled her to the ground. More agents swarmed in from outside, weapons drawn. The woman didn't resist, her expression one of professional resignation rather than fear. Later, Agent Donovan informed me they'd found 3 different methods of assassination in the car. The syringe, containing a compound that would have caused heart failure, a garrote wire hidden in her watch, and a knife in her boot. Antonia Vasquez, he said, showing me her file. Former military intelligence, worked as a private contractor for the past decade. Never failed an assignment until today, so it's over. I asked hopefully. Donovan's expression remained grave. Grayson still has resources. Vasquez was expensive. $2 million shows how badly they want you silenced. But there are cheaper options. That night, back at Aunt Judith's house, my house, I couldn't sleep despite the agents stationed outside. I sat in her study, surrounded by her books and papers, feeling a connection to this woman I'd barely known. She had faced these same fears alone and disbelieved. At least I had support, validation. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this indefinitely, looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. It was time to take control of the narrative. I called Sarah Chen. I need your help again, I said when she answered. I want to do an interview. Tell the whole story, everything. Are you sure? She asked. The higher your profile, the more protected you are in some ways. But it's what Judith would have done, I said firmly. No more hiding. No more fear. The interview aired on national television 3 days later. For 2 hours, I sat across from Sarah Chen, cameras capturing every word as I detailed the entire story, from Judith's initial discovery to the recent assassination attempt. We showed documents, photographs of victims, and excerpts from Judith's journals. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with calls for justice. Protesters gathered outside Hammond and Westfield's offices and Grayson Pharmaceuticals' remaining facilities. Politicians who had received donations from Grayson scrambled to distance themselves, promising reform and oversight. The day after the interview aired, I received a call from someone I never expected, Marvin Ellison. Robert Grayson's former driver. I saw you on TV, he said, his voice tense. I have information, but I can't talk over the phone. Meet me at Riverside Park near the boat launch. Come alone. I immediately called Agent Donovan, who was adamantly against the meeting. This screams set up, he insisted, then set a trap, I countered. But this could be important. Ellison worked for Grayson for 15 years. He would know things no one else does. The FBI arranged an elaborate operation. I would meet Ellison, wearing a wire, with agents disguised as joggers, dog walkers, and maintenance workers throughout the park. Snipers were positioned on nearby buildings. If this was an assassination attempt, they'd be ready. Ellison was already waiting when I arrived, a thin man in his 60s with nervous eyes. He jumped when I approached. "Thank you for coming," he said, glancing around anxiously. "I don't have much time. What information do you have?" I asked directly. "Not just information, proof." He patted his jacket pocket. "Recordings. For years, I drove Mr. Grayson everywhere. The car had a privacy partition, but I installed my own equipment. He spoke freely with his associates, never thinking I was listening. Why come forward now? Why not before?" Ellison's face crumpled with shame. "Fear, self-preservation. I told myself it wasn't my business." He swallowed hard. "But seeing those victims' faces in your interview, my own daughter takes medication for a chronic condition. It could have been her." He handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Conversations about bribing FDA officials, discussing which doctors to pressure or threaten, explicit discussions about eliminating problems, including your aunt. Why give this to me instead of the authorities?" "Because I don't trust them," he said bluntly. "Too many have been in Grayson's pocket over the years. But you stood up to them despite everything." "You'll make sure this gets used properly." I pocketed the drive. "You should come with me. The FBI can protect you." Ellison shook his head. "I've made other arrangements. By this time tomorrow, I'll be somewhere they can't find me." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "There's one more thing you should know. It's about your aunt's cancer." My blood ran cold. "What about it?" "It wasn't natural. Grayson had her poisoned slowly over months. He talked about it with Dr. Lansing from the pharmaceutical division. They designed it to mimic stage 4 lymphoma. Untraceable, they said. Rage and grief surged through me. I'd suspected this from Judith's letter, but hearing it confirmed made it horrifyingly real. "We'll add it to the charges." "They're never going to stop," Ellison warned. "Not as long as they have money and connections. Be careful." With that, he walked away, disappearing among the trees. The contents of Ellison's flash drive were explosive. Voice recordings spanning years provided direct evidence of crimes beyond what we had already uncovered. Tax evasion, bribery of government officials, blackmail, and multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Robert Grayson's voice was clearly identifiable, along with those of the Hammond and Westfield partners and several prominent business and political figures. The district attorney added dozens of new charges. Several of Grayson's political allies were indicted. 3 FDA officials were arrested. The case expanded like a spider's web, touching pharmaceutical regulators, research institutions, and media executives who had buried early reports about the drug's dangers. Through it all, I continued living in Aunt Judith's house, though I no longer felt the need to lock the door at 6 p.m. Whatever or whoever had been knocking seemed to have disappeared once the truth emerged. Perhaps it had only been Judith's way of ensuring I would find her hidden evidence before Grayson's people did. 6 months after the initial arrests, I attended the sentencing hearing for Robert Grayson. The courtroom was packed with media and victims' families. When the judge announced his sentence, life without parole for multiple counts of murder, a cheer erupted from the gallery as Grayson was led away in handcuffs. He stopped and turned toward me, his face contorted with hatred. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You're nothing, and nobody. My associates will—" "Your associates have turned on you," I interrupted calmly. "Check the news, Robert. While you've been in custody, they've been cutting deals, testifying against you to save themselves." His face paled as the bailiffs pulled him away. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Standing on the steps in the bright sunshine, I thought about Aunt Judith, her courage, her persistence, her ultimate sacrifice. "Today isn't about vengeance," I told the cameras. "It's about justice and accountability. No corporation, no matter how wealthy or powerful, should be able to put profits above human lives." My aunt gave everything to expose this truth. I was just the person who helped finish what she started. In the months that followed, I established the Judith Saunders Foundation for Corporate Accountability. using a portion of the settlement money from the civil suits against Grayson Pharmaceuticals. The foundation funded investigative journalism and legal support for whistleblowers facing retaliation. 1 year to the day after I inherited the house, I held a memorial service for Judith in the backyard garden she had loved. My mother came, along with Sarah Chen, some of the victims' families, and even Agent Donovan. We shared stories about Judith, her brilliance, her determination, her unwavering moral compass. As dusk fell and guests began to leave, Mom pulled me aside. "She would be so proud of you," she said, her eyes glistening. "Not just for exposing the truth, but for creating something positive from all this tragedy." I nodded, looking around at the house that had become not just a home, but a symbol. I think she knew exactly what she was doing when she left me this place. And the 6 p.m. rule. I smiled. It served its purpose. It made me cautious, observant. It kept me alive long enough to find the truth. I checked my watch, 5:59 p.m., but I don't think we need to worry about that anymore. As the clock ticked over to 6 p.m., we walked back inside, leaving the door unlocked behind us. Whatever had been knocking would never return. The truth had set us all free.